And now we're going to move along to talking about emails. Now, emails, there's a lot of different elements that you can test. Okay, but going back to the goal of this webinar and some of the things that I've already talked about, there's really only a handful of things. You can get really technical, but I'm going to start with, in my opinion, if there's only one thing that you can test that doesn't cost any money to test, that you can implement it right away, that you usually don't have to get 8 gazillion decision makers to sign off on, and that will improve your overall results quickly overnight, that element would be the subject line. Now, bear with me here. Why is that? So let's say your email is, you're consistently getting 5% open rates. And let's say your click-through rate is a 10% click-to-open rate, and your conversion rate is like a 1.5% conversion rate. Well, guess what? If you just improve that open rate from 5% to 7%, and everything else stays even, you just greatly improved all your results. Very often when I work with clients around email, the very first thing I'll ask is, when was the last time you tested your subject lines? Because you can test a ton of different subject lines depending on the size of your list and the size of your campaigns very quickly. And once again, it doesn't cost money. It's something that you don't need to get tons of sign off on. You can sit down for a half hour with a group of people or by yourself and come up with a bunch of subject lines to test. And you just need one of those. And if you go from a 5% open rate to a 7% unique open rate, that's a huge win for you, off a half hour of work and pretty much spending no money. So let's talk about subject lines a little bit. You know, there's different types of subject lines you can do. First off, personalization versus not personalized. You know, typically personalization does work. But by personalization, I don't mean just name, even though that's the example I use. That could be job title. I did about a year ago, maybe a year and a half ago, a very large test of millions upon millions of emails. And we were actually testing to educators for a very large online retailer that everybody knows. And the one thing I suggested, and they were doing a, save 25% when you sign up for why to educators. And educators are fickle because they don't really buy, it was a whole thing. But anyway, I just suggested adding in their title into the subject line. It's very easy to dynamically insert somebody's title. So they basically just said, hey, are you a gym teacher? Save 25% when you sign up for this program, versus, hey, save 25% when you sign up for this program. Everything else was the same. And just by inserting that job title, we saw a 25% lift in open rates, and click-through and conversion rates stayed the same. So just making that very little tweak to the subject line in regards to personalization worked extremely well. Vague versus specific. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. You got to test it. And you should really just look at it as a quiver in, an arrow in your quiver. Because sometimes vague works well, sometimes it doesn't. Depends on what you're doing, depending on your audience. Everything you do is always vague. It's not always going to work. So it's just something to test out. So this is the best next move for your future versus ABC grad program. Your future starts here. Short versus long. 5 tips to save money. 5 life-changing tips for homeowners in Connecticut. Okay. Long typically does work better, but I would never discourage anybody from testing it out. From field. We talked about this a little bit already. Instead of just saying, hey, from the company, having it be from the individual. Overall, having it be from an individual does work best, okay? But once again, I would always encourage somebody to test it. And just here's a quick test that I was involved with just to show how much this really does work. Here was a test that we did. Once again, this is from that study that I mentioned before, that I'll mention again, is that we had a client who was sending teachers, educators, have to get a certain amount of professional development credits every year to keep their certification. And this is what the space that this organization was in. And we sent out an email with this, it's not ABC Company, different name, of course, but with that subject line. And it was a flop. We only got a 3% open rate, a 0.13% click-through rate. Now that's click to delivered, not click to open. And then about a 0.13% unsubscribe rate. Now that we were lucky in this case because we were able to really, since nobody responded to it anyway, we sent out the same exact email to the same exact audience on the same exact day at the same exact time. The only thing we changed was the from and the subject line. And this is the results that we got. So instead of it just being the company, we had it be from a person. So of course it wasn't Jane Doe director, but we had a very specific person with their title and the company name. And then we got very specific as far as Tennessee K through 12 teachers, important information regarding your PD credits. And just those two changes, we went from a 3% unique open rate to over a 10% unique open rate. So huge difference. Our click-through rate went from a 0.13% click-through rate, now that's delivered to click, to a 0.5. Now, 0.5 is kind of acceptable. I usually like to see it at about 0.1, but I mean, I'm sorry, about a 1%, but 0.5 really isn't that bad. Still needed some work there, but as you can see, and then that would, going back to what I was saying before, that's the data telling me, hey, now we have a 0.5%, so where should I test? I should be testing the creative. So a lot of improvement, but still some room. So then the next steps I would be is to test the design. And then finally, the unsubscribe rate went down too because the right people were opening it. So very, very important. Just by changing the from and the subject line, we were able to drastically improve results and take a campaign that was a complete dud and put life into it.